What's up everyone, Travis the Stock Geek here once again, and it's late October, which means it's earnings reporting season again. Now what is earnings season and why do we care about it as investors? Well, here in the US, public companies are required to report their quarterly financial results 4 times a year. And most companies follow the typical calendar cycle where their quarters end March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, and December 31st. And so a couple weeks after those quarters end, the companies start reporting the results from those quarters. So in late January, late April, late July, and late October, we get a bunch of companies putting out press releases and doing conference calls presenting the results from the prior quarters. Now, on some days, we might get as many as a couple hundred companies reporting results, some before the market opens, others after the market closes. But we get a lot of information, and that information has really big implications for the individual stocks as well as the market as a whole. We see big moves in certain stocks during earnings season. Like today, we just saw Tesla report a surprise quarterly profit after the market closed, and it looks like the stock is up about 20% after hours. On the flip side, to give you another example, yesterday, iRobot, that maker of robotic vacuum cleaners, reported results that didn't look so hot and actually had kind of weak guidance for the following quarter, and that stock was down 10% today. So again, pretty big implications for stocks, and we get a lot of information during this time. Now, you might be asking, well, where do I go to find information about companies and their earnings during earnings season? Well, if you want to find out what companies are reporting on what days, it's always helpful to look at an earnings calendar. There are sites like Seeking Alpha or Trading Economics, or even sites like Estimize, where you can see what companies are reporting on what days, and some of those sites even show you what the estimates are that Wall Street analysts are estimating those companies will earn for the quarter before the company actually reports the quarter. So those are great sites. Trading Economics, for example, you can actually filter down to some of the largest companies to just see what the bellwether companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Intel, McDonald's, Nike, when those companies are reporting. So I find those sites pretty helpful. Now, if you have a specific company that you're invested in or that you're considering investing in and you want to go find their earnings results on the day that they report, I always find it best to go to the source. So I like to Google for that company's investor relations site, which you can usually just find by Googling company name and investor relations. So for instance, let's say you're looking at Facebook. If you just Google Facebook investor relations, usually that top link that you'll find in your search engine will take you to the right site. And on that site, you'll often see the information from the earnings release. There's typically a press release, which will have management comments about what was happening during the quarter, as well as financial information like the income statement, the cash flow statement, and the balance sheet. Now, companies will also have a conference call after they release the financial information, and the link to that conference call can often be found on that investor relations site as well. During the conference call, management will not only make statements about the business, but they'll often talk about what the business looks like going forward for the next quarter. We call that guidance. And they'll also take question and answer from Wall Street analysts, and occasionally a big institutional investor will get to ask a question as well. So these conference calls are really helpful, and they give a lot of information about the underlying businesses. If you happen to miss the live conference call, you can often find transcripts of the conference call where you can read what was said and what the Q&A was. And there are sites like Seeking Alpha or Atom Finance that actually now have these earnings transcripts for free, which is awesome. Some companies, like Facebook for instance, even post transcripts on their investor relations site, although most companies still aren't doing that yet, which is unfortunate. But again, luckily we have these free sites and free resources now where we can find a lot of these transcripts. And you can also find transcripts on paid sites like BAM SEC, which is a great resource that I pay for, where I can find not only transcripts from earnings calls, but also from other investor events that the company has, and even financial filings that are sorted in a really nice way and make it really easy for you to find a lot of the key financial filings for a company. So those are great resources. Now, I mentioned that earnings results will often have implications for the market as a whole. So I often like to go look at what's called an earnings scorecard to look at what are the trends in earnings reports generally and broadly in the market as a whole. If you Google FactSet earnings scorecard, FactSet puts out a great free resource that shows, for instance, what percentage of the S&P 500 companies have reported on a given day, and what percentage of those companies are seeing earnings increases versus earnings decreases, revenue increases versus revenue decreases. So it's really helpful. For instance, right now we're seeing over 80% of the S&P 500 companies beating earnings estimates, which is a pretty good trend. Although the earnings growth trend for this quarter doesn't look super great, some companies are growing earnings at a really high rate, others not so hot. In general, the average revenue growth rate for US companies this quarter has been about mid-single digits percentage revenue growth, and about flat in terms of earnings growth. But again, some companies like in tech and healthcare are seeing much higher rates of growth, while companies in oil and gas industries and other industries are seeing earnings declines. So it really depends on, company by company what's happening. But it is interesting to see some of those broader trends in the earnings scorecard too. Now, I'm going to talk in a follow-up video about what I really like to key in on in terms of earnings press releases and quarterly earnings financial statements. I'll talk about what I like to look for because there's a lot of information there, and you want to be able to get good at scanning that quickly and picking out the things that are really important and the things that actually matter and drive stock price. So I'll talk about that in a future video, and we'll talk about the things that I typically look for in those releases as well as in the conference calls. But for now, hopefully this was helpful, and good luck during earnings season. And if you have any other questions about earnings season, hit me in the comments, and I'll see you guys soon.